On episode 138 of the Vincast, I chat with Leanne De Bortoli of De Bortoli Wines. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Vincast. My name is James Garesbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino, and I'm thrilled to have you listening to a new episode, a really awesome episode. I'm very excited to share the story of today's guest, and I look forward to hearing everyone's impressions and feedback. But before I get into that, I wanted to let you know that I've been invited to put together an amazing six-pack of wine by the guys at The Local Drop, which is a fantastic sort of wine curating, personalized sommelier service based here in Melbourne. And probably unsurprisingly, the six-pack that I've put together is around Australian wines made from Italian grape varieties. I make no secret of my love of Italian grape varieties, particularly here in Australia. Of course, I've now made 3 different vintages of wines made exclusively from Italian grape varieties sourced from Australian regions. And I'm really excited about this pack. Some of the producers in there I personally, believe in, and they've done amazing work. And I think one has actually been a former guest, and maybe a couple more might be future guests. And the pack actually includes one of my own wines made from the 2017 vintage. So please head to The Local Drop very soon. That pack will be available for $175 plus freight. It's a fascinating opportunity to look at what I think is a potential of Italian varieties here in Australia. So please do support The Local Drop as well. They do an amazing job. They're sourcing some beautiful wines, and I'm really excited to work with them. So yeah, as I mentioned, I've got an amazing guest on this episode. It is actually Leanne De Bortoli from De Bortoli Wines. Leanne and her family are celebrating 90 years of De Bortoli wine history this year. So I was really glad to be able to catch up with her out in the Yarra Valley, their winery, to chat about the amazing impact that De Bortoli has had on the Australian wine industry, but also Leanne's involvement in the business. So I do hope you enjoy the episode. Please do stick around until the end to find out how you can get in contact with Leanne and myself. But until then, I'll see you on the other side. Leanne, we are here in the beautiful Yarra Valley estate of De Bortoli Wines, and we're about to have a chat. So thank you very much for making some time in your no doubt very busy schedule, and welcome on the Vincast.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Leanne, I start every episode of my podcast asking my guests the earliest memory that they can think of where they kind of realised what wine was and the importance of wine that kind of made them really fall in love with it.
It's probably a little bit hard for me because growing up in a wine family, we lived opposite a winery. Wine was a part of our life. My parents were involved in it. We were surrounded by vines, surrounded by everything that goes on. So probably, I suppose from the earliest age, I don't know how old I was, but when we would sit at the dinner table with my parents, and my brothers and I would want to have a glass of wine too, so we would have...
They do it in that Italian way and then water it down a little bit?
Yes, watered it down a lot, and I think it was with lemonade, so it was a little bit of red with a lot of lemonade.
Yeah.
And then as we got older, it was, more wine, less lemonade. So, it's sort of...
The cocktail changed.
Yes, it did.
So where did you guys actually grow up?
In Bilbul, in New South Wales, country New South Wales. So Bilbul is very close to Griffith.
Right.
So you're talking about, fairly much out in the country.
Yeah. And this is where the sort of the De Bortoli family kind of got their start, correct?
They did. It was my grandfather when he migrated from Italy back in the early 20s. He ended up in Melbourne, but at that time there were a lot of Italians who were going up to Griffith. And so he went up there because he knew of people up there. And so he just started working for other farmers. And at one point he was living under a rainwater tank and growing vegetables along the Channel Bank and working for a farmer. Well, it was a vineyard at that time, and it was called Jones's Winery, which later on was taken over or part of McWilliams. And we were given some photos by the McWilliams family of 30 years ago, which actually showed the rainwater tank and the vegetables on the Channel Bank from where my grandfather basically started.
Wow.
But he worked hard, saved all his money, and bought a small mixed fruit farm.
Which part of Italy do you come from?
From near Veneto, so northwest of Venice, at the foot of the Dolomites.
Oh, wow.
So probably the actual town was called Castelcucco, but it's very close to Asolo, Bassano del Grappa. It's probably the largest regional town.
Yeah.
And we've been there many times, and we actually had a family Christmas there about 12 years ago.
Wow.
But it's the most beautiful part of Italy, and it must have been quite a shock for him coming over at that time when, this beautiful mountainous green countryside, and then coming over to what was essentially just flat terrain, and the irrigation system was only just being sort of set up. So Griffith was very, very dry, but it was fertile, beautiful red soils. So all it needed was water, and water was brought to the region.
Yep.
And I don't know if you've ever been to Griffith.
I haven't actually. It's kind of not really on the way to anything.
No, it's in the middle of nowhere, really.
You have to go specifically to that place.
Exactly. But as you drive into Griffith, it's there's orchards, there's and especially in springtime when the almond trees or all the fruit trees are in blossom, and you've got vineyards, and it is a thriving region and a thriving township. And back in the days that my grandfather was there, it was very much an Italian community. So in the early years, nobody really needed to speak English because they were dealing a lot of the time in Italian.
Was it also quite regional? I know that post-World War II, historically, there was a lot of migration of people from specific regions of Italy would end up in certain areas.
Yes.
Or they, like Melbourne, Sydney, they tended to sort of, I think Melbourne had slightly more Sicilians, for example. Was that also the case then?
A lot of northern Italians.
Okay.
And I guess when when you have migrants going to a particular place, and so when other migrants from a similar region, when they come to a country, I guess they
particularly
tend to migrate to that same place.
Particularly if they can only speak the local dialect.
Very much so, yes. So there were northern Italians, but there are also quite a few Calabrians as well, so southern Italians. So there was, there was a bit of mixture.
A lot of Calabrians ended up in Shepparton, for
yes.
example. And obviously this period in history post World War One, and there was a lot of fighting in northern Italy. So
yes.
I can imagine it would have been pretty rough in Italy
yes.
at that time, and then so of course.
Well, for him as the youngest of quite a large family, he knew that the opportunities were very limited for him on the family farm.
Sure.
And also, Europe was recovering from the war.
So he was a farmer back in Italy?
Yes, family... but it was just basically a farm that provided food for themselves.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
So it wasn't anything commercial.
No, okay.
So for him...
But he knew farming?
He knew farming,
Great.
Yes.
Okay.
And so when he came out to Australia, at that time there were all the soldier settlement farms that had been given to the returning soldiers.
Yeah.
But a lot of them, they weren't farmers.
Yeah, they didn't. Yeah. Okay.
And so many of them walked off the farms or sold the farms quite cheaply. So it was a very good opportunity for a young enterprising Italian migrant to come in who knew how to farm.
Yeah.
So for him, when he first bought the farm, and that's where the mothership still is today.
Sure.
So it's expanded quite significantly
Sure.
from those first days. But There was some Shiraz grapes on there, and there were fruit trees, and he ended up planting other fruit trees, and he had his chickens and pigs and pigeon coop, and so it was all about self-sustaining.
A classic fattoria Italian model.
Yes.
Did he meet your grandmother here?
In Italy. They were childhood sweethearts, so she was from a neighbouring village.
So she came out later on?
She came out afterwards.
Right.
So she worked as a nanny in France to earn her fare, to be able to come out and join him.
Okay.
So she...
It must have been a shock for her as well.
Oh, yes.
Even, he probably would have been writing to her and kind of trying to put it into context what living in Griffith was like. And she would have gone, okay, I can't quite understand that. And getting and going, wow, it's a big country.
Very much so. And she landed in Sydney, and she was supposed to be picked up by her brother, and something happened, but somebody looked after her. So she always had a very, very good impression about coming to Australia and
that's good.
Australians.
That's lucky.
Yes.
So how did he, growing up, at what point did you kind of get a sense of the importance of that, being a third generation Australian, Italian Australian, and the pioneering work that your grandfather actually did?
I think because my grandparents also lived on the farm,
Sure.
so
Yep.
growing up with them, and I think as a child you probably don't really think terribly much about it. But when I look at what they set up, and then when my father took over the business, and then how he contributed to it, and he was a visionary as well. So for my grandparents setting up the business that they did, and for them taking a certain amount of risks, as they were very conservative, but still to be able to set up a business and plan and try different things and try and make wines that they knew that there were different markets for.
Mm-hmm.
But then my father came along, and he had a bigger plan, and he used to wait until my grandparents would head up to Sydney for a couple of months, and that's when he would do a fairly large expansion program.
Wow. Okay.
And then my grandparents would come back, and my grandfather and father would have this almighty row because my grandfather was very conservative, and he didn't want to overstretch himself and go into debt. Whereas I think for my father, he could see the potential.
This would have been post World War II?
This was with my father. He took over he was working in the business in the 1950s.
Yeah, okay. So coming, having migrated from Italy with basically nothing, and, then kind of during Depression era and then World War II, your grandfather and grandmother, would have had to, we have to sort of live within our means. We can only grow incrementally. We can't do big expansions. And then your father kind of saying, no, this is new opportunities, this is new energy. We have to grow. We have to...
Typical father and son relationship.
Exactly, yeah.
In a family business.
Very big kind of generational, divide as far as ideas about how to run a business. And as far as yourself and your siblings, did you always kind of have an idea that you would all end up in the family business?
No. If anyone maybe was probably more pushed into it, I guess you could say it would have been my older brother Darren, only because he was the oldest boy, and I think my grandfather sort of just assumed he would go into the business, but there wasn't ever any real pressure on all of us. Darren studied winemaking at Roseworthy, and then came back and was looking after winemaking at the winery. And then with my other two brothers and myself, we just sort of came into the business at different times. But also at the time that we were all coming into the business, it was when we were going through enormous growth. So So there were the opportunities for us to come in and for us to come in different parts.
Right, okay.
Find our feet.
Sure. So before you kind of became a part of the family business, what did you do? How did you kind of explore and try different things?
Not a great deal. I did a bit of travel overseas, but then I was interested in the business, and so I did wine marketing at Roseworthy all those years ago.
Back when it was at Roseworthy.
At Roseworthy, exactly. And then I enjoyed being in wine, and I probably, if I'd had the time again, we all would have benefited from maybe going out and working elsewhere.
Yeah, look, as a member of the fantastic Australia's First Families of Wine group, I know that some of my other former guests who are, a more recent generation, they kind of their family policy was almost that you have to go
away.
Yes. Like for example. It was the
Brown brothers,
the Brown
yeah.
girls from who are part of All Saints. Their dad said, no, you have to go off and you have to go and if you want to work in the wine industry, fine, go and work for a different wine company, go and get some experience, go and kind of be able to come back with a different perspective, a different context to help our family business grow and evolve. So that wasn't necessarily the case with you?
No, it wasn't. But that is something that we have set in place for the next generation,
Sure.
the fourth geners.
Yep.
That they need to go off and get a degree or learn a trade, do something, but then go and work somewhere else. It can be in a totally unrelated field.
Yep.
But to have at least 2 years away somewhere else.
And at no point can you kind of begrudge your parents. It's like, I've only ever worked in the wine industry. It's like, no, you had an opportunity, hadn't you? Another career.
Yes. So the elder fourth geners, of which I have 2 daughters.
Yep.
Steve and I have 2 daughters, and Darren has 3 children. So they're currently, some of them are working in the business, and our other daughter, she's working for another company, totally unrelated to wine at the moment.
Okay.
But we would welcome them all back into the industry, but it's kind of nice for them to go out and be a little fish in a big pond.
Sure. I can imagine that expansion and growth, it becomes really important when you're looking at kind of fourth generation, when there's how many great-grandchildren of the founder of the estate. It's like, well, we have to find jobs for them all.
Yes. And that's something we're very conscious about, is that if they want to come into the family business, they need to be coming in and contributing. And it doesn't matter if it's just in being on the bottling line for a while, or being involved in winemaking, or working on the farm, or working in marketing. It's good for them to get experience in all those different areas.
Of course.
But we're not going to create a job just for them. There has to be an opening for them to come into, and they do have to prove themselves, which is probably a little bit more than my brothers and I had to do.
Yeah, no doubt. I guess it's one of the other benefits of having children, is that you can get some cheap labour earlier on.
Yes.
It's like it's an internship.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So why did you kind of want to follow sort of the marketing side of things? Where did that kind of interest come from? You went and studied at Roseworthy, you studied the wine marketing course.
I did. I was interested just in what we could be doing with new products and new product development,
New markets.
Yeah. Oh, yes. And at that stage, the market was just growing massively.
Sure.
In Australia.
Yeah.
But then when my family bought this property here in the Yarra Valley, and that was back in 1987, at that stage I was still, I had finished at Roseworthy, and I was just working in the business up in New South Wales. But I met winemaker, Stephen Webber, and then we dated for a while, and we were married in 1989. And at that time, Steve was a winemaker for Lindemans, so he had been based in at Caradoc, and then when we were married, he was moved to look after the winemaking at Rouge Homme in Coonawarra.
Right.
So we were there for about 6 months when my family approached us about coming across to manage this property here.
Sure.
Which we didn't need to be asked twice. And so we came over in May of 1989, and we've been here ever since. And we've developed the vineyards, we've developed the restaurant, cellar door facility, just what we do for tourism, very much involved in new products, planting different varieties. And then after that time, my family also then bought property in King Valley, which we've planted vines there, and more recently in Heathcote. So we're expanding to different areas, but here in the Yarra Valley, Steve and I look after pretty much all the wine produced from those properties.
So before the Yarra Valley, the Dixons Creek estate was established, it was only in New South Wales?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
So obviously the move to the Yarra Valley in Victoria, possibly seeking out slightly cooler climates, was related to how the wine market was evolving. Before the 80s, and kind of the interest in Chardonnay, for example, and interest in sparkling wine came on board. What was the Australian market like for wine, and how did De Bortoli kind of fit into that?
Well, export was growing, and for us there were huge opportunities overseas. We had a terrific market in Sweden, in the UK, Japan. We were building new markets elsewhere overseas, but also it was very strong here in Australia. And I think for us, because we had our own distribution setups in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, we were able to service those with our own sales teams. We had our own drivers. So for us as a company, and having quite a wide portfolio, until we bought the Yarra, yes, it was mainly in the inexpensive end.
Sure.
But then in coming to the Yarra, where we were able to build on a premium wine portfolio, it sort of gave us something that we could go out with a sales team.
So you guys have been self-distributing into the wholesale market for 40, 50 years?
Yes. It's
wow.
even... it would be pretty close to that.
Wow,
yes.
That's incredible.
Yeah. But we did have, when my grandparents they set up a wholesale arm in Sydney. This is going back back in when would it have been, in the 1940s? So for my grandparents, there was always just having that sort of vertical integration there, and so then when the opportunities came up to be able to set up something similar in Victoria and then in Queensland, we did it.
Yeah. Well, I guess, yeah, I mean, that is kind of the other reason to set up something in a cooler climate region like the Yarra Valley is that in the 80s, the market for Australian wine was not just growing, but also it was becoming more premium.
Yes.
And so there was that kind of need that evolution was necessary. It's like, well, we need to start making more premium wines, and there's only so much premium we can get in a slightly warmer climate.
That's right.
Unless you start moving into alternative varieties, but that's something that's been more recent, of course.
And it was difficult for us in those early days when we did have were making premium wine from here, because for a lot of people and a lot of retailers, they knew of us as basically producers of inexpensive wine. Yeah. So we almost had to completely over-deliver to be able to build up our credibility, and it was difficult in some parts, but then we also had we did have a loyal following with a lot of people, and I find it quite gratifying now that if you were to speak to a lot of Victorians, their perception of De Bortoli is the Yarra Valley.
Sure.
And they think that this is where we make everything here. And then when we mention that we have a vineyard up in New South Wales, they go, oh, when did you buy that?
Yeah.
So it's interesting how it has changed around. And I think having a tourism set up here for both the restaurant and cellar door,
Absolutely.
That's helped it as well.
Absolutely. And I think that the timing of establishing here at Dixon's Creek was at a time where there were a couple of big players who were moving into the region. For example, speaking from my own experience, having worked at Shandon, they established in 1986, and there was that kind of vision of we're establishing this for partly to be a place that people can come visit. We're only an hour from the city. It's a great place for people to come and taste and learn and see things. And I think establishing a number of different kind of outposts in the Yarra Valley, it's not even that long ago, but you think there mustn't have been that much tourism back then. And you think about what the Yarra Valley is now, and it's incredible.
Oh, and it's expanded beyond wine. Mm-hmm. So there's cider, there's spirits.
Just past a chocolatory.
Chocolatory, of course. There's the tourism offering in the Yarra Valley now is so much more than it was when we first arrived. There are only a handful of wineries. I don't know, maybe 12 wineries, but of those, probably only half of them were open to the public.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you think about some of these, really classic Yarra Valley producers, Yarra Yering and Yeringberg and Mount Mary. Some of them still don't even have cellar doors.
Yeah.
Maybe they open up for one weekend of the year. And so having kind of places for people to come and visit and taste and learn and I guess educate, pull them up that kind of value chain into the more premium areas, and that gave them this perception of De Bortoli as a more premium producer, as a cool climate producer.
Oh yes, and something that we've very much focused on here is about that whole food and wine matching, food and wine education, cheese and wine. We set up a cheese shop and it's for our staff. They when we have visitors coming in, they might order a cheese platter with 4 cheeses, and then the staff will go through and say, okay, try the sparkling wine with this one, try the Chardonnay with this one, try the red with this one, try Noble One with this one. And for a lot of visitors, it's a real revelation, because most people think, oh yes, you have cheese at the end of a meal and you have it with red wine. Yeah. But there are some cheeses that just don't go with red wine. So for us, that's what we want to focus on here, is just that whole education, and also when you're having wine too, you're not going around tasting wines. A whole lot of wines at cellar door doesn't give you what the experience of
that's not how you drink wine
about.
At home. That's not how you enjoy. You're having it with the meal. And I think that's another really important thing, because am I right that this was sort of one of the earlier winery restaurants in the Yarra Valley as well?
Yes, there were a couple like Yarraburn, Ferguson's, who had restaurants, but for us, this was probably one of the first, sort of premium style.
Sure.
And it was a baptism by fire, because we knew how to make wine and we knew how to sell wine through cellar door, but actually getting into the restaurant business was a whole different ballgame.
Absolutely. And as far as the kind of the restaurant side of things, did you possibly want to introduce a little bit of an Italian flair to
Very
things?
much so. Well, and even now, we play to our strengths, we play to what we're about, and so for us it is very much about that Italian background. So we have quite a few pastas on the menu, and they're all house-made. Gnocchi, of course, we've got to have gnocchi in there, and a lot of the food that we do is more about shared dining, and more today. Whenever you go to a restaurant, I think people are wanting to have more of that shared dining experience.
Absolutely. And that's I think that's kind of when people are going out for dinner in town, more often than not, it might just be you and your partner. Whereas I know this, having worked in cellar door myself, going out to a wine region and visiting wineries, going and tasting stuff like that's something you do with, maybe a few couples or with an extended family, something like that. Right. So that, it's the perfect opportunity to sort of having that kind of shared experience, that family or friends experience. And I think it's a beautiful way to, enjoy and learn a little bit about wine, having it in the context of food.
Oh, very much so. And on weekends, there's large groups. We'll have groups of 12, 14, 16. Some of them are celebrating important milestones. Others are coming out for a day in the valley. We're finding we're getting a lot more Chinese visitors to the region, and often when they come out as larger groups.
Yes,
and they'll come up to the restaurant, and they might still be learning about wine, but they're very keen, and we're just finding now that they're certainly being a lot more open, and for them the dining experience is very much about. Well, we have a few round tables, so they like to sit at the round tables, but for them it's about ordering a few dishes and putting it into the centre, and everybody just helping themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was always one of the great things about going and having a nice dinner on Victoria Street in Richmond was that kind of shared thing that we would do. So beyond establishing in the Yarra Valley, you mentioned a couple of other regions in Victoria. What was the reasons for moving into some of these other regions, apart from just expansion and needing to produce a bit more wine?
Well, I think it's always just looking at other regions and looking at whether there is a history of grape production there, and certainly up in the northeast with quite a few Italians moving into the King Valley. A lot of them were tobacco growers, and then they moved across to establishing vineyards.
And we mentioned the Browns, of course.
Yes, and now with the Darzottos and the Pizzinis, and it's becoming known for things like Prosecco and Pinot Grigio and basically anything that ends in O or A. but we're pretty excited with what the King Valley can do. Some of the varieties that we planted there in the early days aren't working. We probably thought that planting Shiraz there was clever, but we're finding now that there are other Iberian varieties which are doing better, and we have things like Tempranillo and Tintacayo, a few different things planted up there.
Wow.
Sangiovese, Prosecco's just gone crazy, so we do have quite a bit of Prosecco planted as well. And it's such a beautiful region. If anyone's ever been up there, and where our vineyards has a few kilometres of King River frontage, so it's a lovely place to go camping. But it is quite beautiful. It's a different vistas to the Yarra Valley.
Certainly.
But it's
slightly more rugged.
Yes, and it's developing very much a food and wine culture up there as well.
Yeah, and certainly with those Italian families you mentioned, they're connecting a lot with that kind of Italian heritage and the kind of Italian lifestyle, and of course the Pizzini family. Katrina Pizzini, of course, has her cooking school, and I think it actually makes sense, that for you guys to be a part of that, having been a really, really important kind of. Probably one of the earlier ones as far as Italian migrants to establish a wine business and put their name on it in a way. And so does the King Valley fruit go into specific ranges, or are they just
we have a range called Bellariva, which is pretty much just from that vineyard.
Okay.
Then we also have the fruit from there we use for our Windy Peak range, which is just that really lovely mid-level, entry level.
Yes.
We also use it for sourcing or providing fruit for our other ranges. We do a Pinot Bianco from there, which is in our Vinoc range.
Yes.
And our Vinoc range is is a bit of a play label for Steve and I, where we experiment with different things like Nebbiolo Rosé and the Pinot Bianco. We also have a Yarra Valley Sangiovese, Yarra Valley Gamay. So being able to have a few different areas where we can use that fruit, but the Bella Riva is the main range, which is pretty much 100% King Valley. And then across in Heathcote, which we bought a vineyard from there only a couple of years ago,
Right.
we see enormous potential for a region like Heathcote for producing just really beautiful, plump, generous reds. And there's a history of Shiraz, Heathcote Shiraz, but we're also excited with varieties like Grenache, and we think Grenache will do very well in Heathcote.
It makes sense. It makes sense. I for a long time, I kind of considered Heathcote as the sort of the Barossa of Victoria.
Yes, yeah.
And because Shiraz did so well, and it's interesting that they're, apart from a few kind of well-known but smaller producers who are working with Grenache, you don't really see it as much.
No,
Considering how much Grenache and I guess Mourvedre you see in regions like the Barossa or McLaren Vale in South Australia.
Very much so. But I think in the future we'll see more there. And what we love about Grenache, it's such a perfumed variety, and it just adds that perfume to spicy Shiraz.
It's very versatile as well. It's a great rosé variety.
Yes, well, we do make a Grenache rosé as well.
And speaking of rosé, that's been one of the other things that you guys have been really, really working hard on. Is I know having worked in the cellar door, I would kind of be on a tasting bar, and I would say, "Oh, would you like to try our rosé?" And people would say, "Oh, I don't like rosé. I don't really like sweet wines." And you would have to, every time, kind of explain, well, actually, most rosé is dry. This is a dry rosé. Maybe there's some fruitiness to it, but it's a dry rosé. And this is something you guys have really been pushing, is this rosé revolution, as you call it.
Yes, pale, dry rosé, grown for purpose, and certainly in the early days, most of the rosé that was available out there was the darker pink, sweeter style. But for anyone
great wines in their own right. But,
well, that's right. But for anyone who's ever been to the south of France, you just see all those gorgeous rosés there, Mediterranean climate, delicious food. Everybody's drinking rosé. And then you come back to Australia and you just think it should absolutely take off here. Rosé is made for the Australian climate.
And lifestyle and barbecues.
Oh yes, and so when Steve and I, quite a few years ago, after coming back from south of France, all inspired, and we decided to make a Pinot Rosé, and our sales team were very cagey, and they said, "Oh, there's not a market for that. Make what you want for cellar door, but there's not a general market out there." And we decided to back ourselves, so we made a little bit more. And we did have it in cellar door, but we did go out there and we did show to certain retailers and to restaurants, and it was enormously popular. Since then, we now make about 4 or 5 pale dry rosés from different varieties.
And are these all under the La Bohème
no,
branding,
they're
or
under
branding?
different ranges. So the Villages, which we do the Heathcote Shiraz Grenache. We also make a Grenache Rosé, and also from the King Valley we make a Sangiovese Rosé.
My favourite rosé variety.
And then here from this property we make Nebbiolo Rosé, and the Pinot. We also make the La Bohème Pinot Rosé.
Right.
And there's a couple of others in the offing as well.
Now, I've noticed that you mentioned quite a few Italian varieties there. The kind of the impetus to plant more Italian varieties and make more wines with Italian varieties, was that kind of trying to connect to the family heritage, or was it trying to see more potential with the alternative varieties in the market, or was it kind of both?
Both, actually. Yes, we did want to plant some Italian varieties, and we planted Nebbiolo on this property here, but we feel it's probably it will be some time before we do a dry red style. We have made a dry red, but we've found that the Nebbiolo Rosé is a very popular style of wine.
Sure.
So we're looking at is with all the different regions, is looking at the varieties that are suited to those regions. So even places like Heathcote and in parts King Valley, up in Griffith, looking at some of those Iberian varieties, which are more suited to sort of the warmer climate. But then also looking at some of the different varieties that we plant here. So we've planted, we have Pinot Grigio or Pinot Gris, and what else have we got? Sangiovese, Nebbiolo. We've also planted Pinot Blanc.
Pinot Bianco, yeah.
Yes, and another variety we're very excited about for the Yarra Valley. It's not an Italian variety, but Gamay. We feel that Gamay's got huge potential here.
Sure. Wow.
But what we love about the Italian varieties is that some of them have that wonderful savoury quality about them that goes so well with food.
Absolutely.
So having a Sangiovese with a bowl of pasta, or Greco with barbecued shellfish.
Sure. Moreton Bay bugs, something like that.
Yes.
Fantastic. And just one last question. As far as kind of where everything started in Griffith, do you think that there's opportunities to sort of make more premium wines potentially with some of these slightly more Mediterranean varieties, and
in Griffith?
Exactly.
Yes, I think there is. I think it's about finding the right variety.
Sure.
And for us, the good thing about being a family company is that we're prepared to experiment, and if it fails, yes, we pull it out and we plant something else. But
right.
I think there is this willingness to give it a go.
Something that your grandfather probably wasn't able to do.
No, that's right.
But if he hadn't have done what he had done way back when he first arrived here in Australia, then we wouldn't be here chatting about 90 years of incredible De Bortoli wine history.
Exactly.
Leanne, thank you very much. I do really appreciate you making some time. Would you like to let people know about some of if there are any possible events or things you'd like to let them know about, website addresses, any social media accounts you'd like them to follow?
Well, if certainly going to our website, which is just www.debortoli.com.au, and from there, there's certainly, we do have a lot of events happening here at the Yarra Valley. So if anyone is interested in coming out, we have things like the celebration of the pig, some 90th anniversary celebrations later on this year. Yes, we'd love to see people coming out and helping us enjoy 90 years.
Fantastic. And I know that you have quite a social media presence yourself. Do you want to share your social media accounts possibly?
Sure. Well, I love Instagram, and being out here on the vineyard gives me the opportunity to take lots of photos of things that are happening around the place. So my Instagram account is just Leanne De Bortoli, my handle, though we also have a De Bortoli Wines Instagram account as well. And we're on Facebook and Twitter, pretty much all of them.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the future, the next 90 years holds.
Yes, well, it'll be in the hands of the fourth geners for the centenary in 10 years.
Indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to this episode of the Vincast. I have been James Garesbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino. And as always, you can find me on social media on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I'm at Intrepid Wino. And you can find the podcast on Twitter at the Vincast. I'd love for you to visit my YouTube channel, Intrepid Wino, one word. Lots of different videos there, including my series with my experiences making my first 2 vintages of Vino Intrepido, and also my series called Let's Taste, where I open Australian and New Zealand wines and share my impressions. I'm approaching 200 editions of that, so do check that out. Pretty soon I'll be putting up one with that awesome local drop Italian varietal Australian wine pack. So yeah, go and subscribe, watch a few videos, like, share on social media, leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. You can find the podcast on a number of different platforms, on iTunes, Podbean, Player FM, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, I hope soon, I think Spotify, maybe whatever the Google, the Android podcasting app will be. Please do subscribe because you will be able to get their full library of episodes, as well as getting the newest episode as soon as it becomes available. And you would be doing me a massive favour by leaving a rating and review, because it's great to get some feedback from the listeners, not only for myself but also for the former and potential guests. Please do visit me at intrepidwino.com. Lots of different ways of getting in contact with me there. Lots of different content I've written in the past as well. But guys, until next time, bye.
Earbuds, Melbourne's podcast network. earbudsnetwork.com